There is a silence that settles into your life when you realize that something has fundamentally shifted in you, and you cannot quite name what it is. You sit in rooms full of people and feel profoundly untethered, as though everyone is participating in an elaborate theater, and you have suddenly become aware of the stage itself. The laughter around you continues, the conversations spiral onward, the movements persist, yet you feel like a ghost watching from just outside the frame. This is not sadness exactly, nor is it loneliness in the way you might have experienced it before. It is something quieter and more unsettling, a kind of disconnection that you cannot explain to anyone without sounding broken. And this is precisely where the real trouble begins. You might start to wonder if something is wrong with you, not theoretically, but with a creeping, intimate conviction that you have somehow become defective. The question arrives in the middle of mundane moments. You are eating dinner or driving, or listening to someone speak, and suddenly you catch yourself thinking, am I depressed? Have I lost the ability to feel? You examine yourself like a scientist studying an organism, looking for the broken part, the malfunction that has caused this withdrawal. This internal scrutiny becomes relentless. You begin cataloging your symptoms. You notice that things that once delighted you now feel hollow. You observe that your capacity for small talk has withered. You sense that your emotional responses have become muted, as though you are watching your own life through a thick pane of glass. And in this observation, a new fear takes root. Perhaps you are becoming cold. Perhaps you are becoming arrogant, elevated above the concerns of others, incapable of genuine connection. Perhaps you are simply broken in a way that cannot be repaired, and everyone around you senses this and keeps a subtle distance because they can feel that something is fundamentally wrong with you. This voice inside you becomes very convincing. It tells you that your lack of interest in the concerns of those around you indicates a kind of spiritual corruption, an emotional death that you are trying to hide. It whispers that your inability to engage in the casual dramas of social life means you have become superior in some contemptible way, or alternatively, that you have become dead in some contemptible way. The voice does not care which interpretation you choose, only that you remain in a state of self-accusation, spinning endlessly between guilt and shame. You begin to avoid situations that expose you to this internal witness. You decline invitations. You find reasons not to attend gatherings. You create distance not out of cruelty, but out of a kind of mercy toward others, a feeling that they are better off without the presence of someone as hollow as you have become. And in this isolation, you feel both relief and deeper despair, because the isolation seems to confirm your suspicion that you are indeed becoming a kind of person that others cannot stand to be around. But what if this entire interpretation is backward? What if the silence you are experiencing, and the distance you are sensing, and the emotional flatness that feels like death is actually something very different? What if you are not breaking down but breaking through? What if you are not dying but waking? Consider that the human being spends the vast majority of their existence in a kind of hypnotic state, running on automatic patterns, responding to stimuli in the way that they have been programmed to respond, chasing the same dopamine hits, rehearsing the same emotional dramas, playing the same roles over and over. The self that you have been performing, the one that laughs on cue, that expresses shock at the right moments, that participates in the consensus reality of social existence, this self is not your deepest reality. It is more like a mask that has been so perfectly fitted to your face that you forgot it was a mask. You have been living inside a dream that was so convincing that you believed it was waking. Now imagine that you begin, very slowly, to wake within that dream. At first, the waking is subtle. You start to notice the scaffolding behind the scenes. You begin to see how the show works, how the buttons are pressed, how the emotions are triggered. You observe other people and see them locked in the same patterns that once held you completely. And you feel a strange combination of compassion and alienation because you are no longer fully inside that dream. This is the moment where others sense something has changed about you, and they cannot articulate what it is. They call you distant. They say you have become cold, or aloof, or arrogant. What they are really sensing is that you have become partially free from the consensus trance, and this freedom makes you incompatible with those who are still fully dreaming. The dream requires your full participation to maintain its power. When you stop participating fully, you become a threat to it, not because you are attacking it, but simply because your non-participation is a kind of evidence that the dream might not be as inevitable as it feels to those still inside it. Think of a person who has been addicted to a substance for years. They move through the world with a constant low-level stimulation running through their system. They feel the need to check for their drug of choice constantly. They structure their time around obtaining it and using it. Their emotions are regulated by it. Their social life is organized around it. Their sense of pleasure is entirely dependent on it. Now imagine that this person, for whatever reason, stops using the substance. In the first weeks, they do not feel free. They feel profoundly empty. The world seems grey. Other people seem pointless. Food has no taste. They feel like something essential has been removed from them. They think about returning to the substance not because they love it, but because without it, life feels like nothing. This is exactly what happens when you begin to wake from the consensus dream. The dream has been your constant stimulation, your constant frame, your constant meaning-making apparatus. Without it, you feel like something has been removed from you. But what has actually been removed is the artificial stimulation. What remains is your capacity for genuine perception, genuine feeling, genuine existence. But you cannot feel this yet, because you are in the withdrawal phase. This is the phase you are in now, and this is why you feel empty rather than awake. The emotions that were stimulated by the dream have dried up. The pleasures that were available within the dream have become inaccessible to you because you are no longer fully inside it. Your former friends and social contacts seem to sense that you are no longer playing the game with full commitment, and so they edge away, not out of malice, but because your non-participation is uncomfortable for them. It creates a kind of dissonance. It reminds them, however faintly, that the game is a game, and human beings by and large do not want to be reminded of this. So you are left in a kind of liminal space, no longer inside the dream, but not yet fully awake into a new way of being. You are between worlds, and this is perhaps the loneliest place there is. The traits that cause others to withdraw from you are not signs of your corruption, they are signs of your liberation, which looks a lot like death from the inside of the dream. You have become quieter, not because you are sulking, but because you no longer feel compelled to fill silence with artificial chatter. You listen more than you speak, not because you have become arrogant, but because the small talk of social life seems to be about something other than what is actually real. You ask deeper questions, and you are uncomfortable with easy answers, not because you are superior, but because you have begun to see the gap between what people say matters and what actually seems to matter when you strip away the conditioning. You no longer participate in gossip and drama, not because you are better than others, but because you can see the mechanism by which gossip and drama keep human beings locked in a particular frequency of consciousness. You have become less reactive to the concerns that animate others, not because you are cold, but because you are beginning to see that many of those concerns are based on an illusion that no longer has power over you. This makes you dangerous to the social matrix, not physically dangerous, but structurally dangerous. You are like someone who has been given the password to the building, and now you can move through it knowing that it is just a building, with walls and floors that could be arranged differently. Everyone else is still treating the building as though its architecture is inevitable and eternal. So when you move through it with full awareness that it is just a building, you seem strange. You seem wrong. You seem to be missing something essential about how to be human. In reality, you are missing something essential about how to be a human in the consensus dream. But the consensus dream is not the only way to be human. It is just the way that most humans have agreed to be human, and it works very well for keeping large numbers of people organized and cooperative. But it does not work very well for any individual human who begins to wake up within it. The traits that alienate you from others are not new traits. They have been emerging slowly, but you are only now becoming aware of them. The reason you are becoming aware of them is because they have reached a threshold where they can no longer be explained away as personality quirks or temporary moods. You are quieter, not sometimes, but consistently. You are more aware of bullshit, not occasionally, but constantly. You have less patience for pretense, not when you are tired, but fundamentally. You care less about status and hierarchy, not temporarily, but durably. You are less interested in accumulating and impressing, not as a phase, but as a stable shift in what you actually value. These are not negative traits. They are traits of someone whose consciousness has begun to extract itself from the consensus trance. But because the consensus trance is what holds most human social bonding together, Someone who has begun to extract themselves will naturally appear incompatible with it. There is a particular kind of cruelty that we inflict on ourselves in this situation. We interpret the natural distance that comes from waking up as evidence that we are worse, not that we are different. We take the alienation that comes from seeing through the dream as evidence of our emotional death, not as evidence of our emotional awakening. We convert the natural consequences of spiritual growth into self-accusations. And this conversion is almost inevitable because we are still partially inside the dream, still partially believing its central narrative, which is that normal is good and different is bad. We are not yet stable in our new perspective. We have lost faith in the old perspective, but not yet developed genuine faith in the new one. We are in the valley between two mountains, and in the valley everything is dark and uncertain. But here is what you must understand about this valley. It is not a place of death. It is a place of transition. It is the space between the caterpillar and the butterfly. And in that space, the caterpillar is not slowly turning into a butterfly while remaining a caterpillar. It is dissolving. It is becoming something undifferentiated and formless before it can take on new form. This dissolution feels like catastrophe from inside the caterpillar, but it is actually the mechanism of transformation. You are not dying. You are reorganizing. You are not becoming less human. You are becoming less performatively human and more actually human. The emotions that you have lost are not real emotions. They were performances of emotions, stimulated by the narrative structures of the consensus dream. The pleasure that has fled is not real pleasure. It was artificial pleasure, generated by temporary satisfaction of conditioned desires. What remains in the wake of these losses is not nothing. It is something quieter and more real, but you cannot feel it yet because you are still too full of withdrawal pain. The loneliness you feel is real, but it is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence of your transition. You are lonely because you have stepped slightly outside the consensus reality, and most other people are still fully inside it. You are lonely because the people who would understand what is happening to you are few and far between, and they are also experiencing their own isolation within the consensus dream. You are lonely because consciousness is, in a certain sense, fundamentally lonely. Once you begin to truly see, you cannot unsee. Once you begin to truly wake, you cannot fall back into the dream with full conviction. You are separated from others by your own awakening, and this separation can feel unbearable. But it is not unbearable. It is just different from the false communion you knew before, the false togetherness that came from all being lost in the same dream together. There is a temptation that arises in this phase, and you must be very careful not to fall into it. There is a temptation to convert your new perspective into a form of superiority, to believe that you have become enlightened while others remain asleep, to develop a kind of spiritual arrogance that is actually more corrosive than the ordinary human arrogance you were escaping. This temptation is very seductive because it seems to make sense of your suffering. If you are suffering because you are more awake, then your suffering means something. It means you are on the right path. It means you are special. It means that the distance people feel from you is actually evidence that you are becoming something greater. And once you believe this, you have simply constructed a new dream, slightly more sophisticated than the old one, but a dream nonetheless. You have converted the discomfort of transition into the comfort of special status. You have created a new narrative that keeps you safe in the familiar patterns of human ego. Just at a higher level, the truth is more mundane and more difficult. You are not becoming enlightened. You are not becoming special. You are not becoming better than others. You are simply becoming more honest about what is actually happening. You are developing a slightly clearer perception of how the mechanisms work. But this clearer perception does not make you better. It does not make you superior. It makes you more aware, and awareness carries its own burden without needing to add the burden of false specialness to it. There are people who are asleep who are kinder than you will ever be. There are people who are lost in the consensus dream who are more genuinely connected to others than you may ever be. There are people who have never questioned any of this, who experience more real joy in a single moment than you might experience in months of your growing awareness. Awakening does not make you better. It only makes you different, and it carries with it real costs alongside whatever benefits it might eventually bring. So you must hold very carefully to this understanding. You are not becoming superior. You are becoming lonely. You are not becoming enlightened. You are becoming alienated. You are not becoming whole. You are becoming fragmented. But fragmentation is not the end of the journey. It is the middle of it. You are like an actor who has broken character mid-performance. You cannot go back to believing in your role. But you have not yet figured out who you are apart from your role. In this in-between space, you will feel like nothing. You will feel like you are made of empty air. You will wonder if you have lost yourself entirely. But you have not lost yourself. You have only lost the character you were playing. And now you must learn to be yourself without the scaffolding that the character provided. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the traits that alienate you, that make people uncomfortable around you, that cause friendships to dissolve and connections to fall away. These traits are not stable. They are not your final form. They are symptoms of a transition. You are not becoming a permanently cold or distant person. You are becoming a person who is no longer artificially stimulated, and in that artificial quiet, you are beginning to build something new. But it takes time. It takes a long time. And during that time, you will be incompatible with people who are still locked in the old patterns. You will seem wrong to them. You will seem broken. You will seem arrogant or depressed or spiritually superior or emotionally dead, depending on what narrative they construct to make sense of the change they feel in you. But all of these narratives will be wrong. The only accurate narrative is that you are in the middle of something and you cannot yet see what it is. And this uncertainty is causing genuine suffering. The friends you lose during this period are not being taken from you by your own fault. They are being released by a kind of natural law. Two people cannot remain in friendship if they are at very different frequencies of consciousness, and neither of them is willing or able to acknowledge this. If you are in the process of waking and your friend is committed to dreaming, you cannot truly meet. You can go through the motions. You can pretend. You can force conversations about the things your friend cares about, and you might even become skilled at faking interest. But underneath, there will be a constant tension, a kind of exhausting performance that neither of you will be able to maintain indefinitely. Eventually, one of you will step back. Usually it is both, simultaneously, each interpreting the other's withdrawal as a kind of rejection or judgment, but it is actually just a recognition of incompatibility. It is not personal, it is structural. When someone is in one state of consciousness and another person is in a different state, authentic connection becomes difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. And most people, when faced with difficulty, will choose distance. This is perhaps one of the hardest truths you will have to accept about this process. You will lose people. Some of them will hurt to lose. Some of them you loved, or believed you loved, or believed you were supposed to love. And their loss will feel like confirmation that you have done something wrong, that you have become someone unlovable, that this new perspective you are developing is actually a kind of sickness. But it is not. It is just the natural attrition that occurs when people move through different phases of consciousness. And if you are wise, you will not try to bridge this gap by going backward. You will not try to convince your former friends that you are still the person they knew. You will not try to force interest in things that no longer interest you. You will allow them to go, and you will find yourself in the company of other people who are also in the midst of their own transition, their own awakening, their own strange alienation from the consensual dream. What you are learning, whether you know it yet or not, is that belonging has an illusion built into it. The belonging you felt when you were fully inside the consensus dream was not real belonging. It was the comfort of shared delusion. Everyone was pretending together, and the pretense was so complete that it felt like genuine connection. But genuine connection requires that you be fully present as yourself, and you cannot be fully present as yourself while you are locked in a performance. So the deeper price of your waking is that you are losing access to the comfort of shared pretense, and there is no comfort more soothing, no belonging more complete than the comfort of shared pretense. It is perhaps the most fundamental human need, this need to pretend together, to agree on a shared story about what is real and what matters. To lose access to this is to lose something essential. To lose it without yet having found a new source of belonging is to experience a kind of primal loneliness. And yet here you are still alive, and you are still conscious. And this consciousness, however painful it is more real than the unconsciousness that preceded it. Your brain is still working. Your heart is still beating. Your perception is still functioning. The fact that you feel empty rather than full does not mean you are broken. It means you are in a space between two different ways of being, and in this space both fullness and emptiness are revealed as illusions. What is actually here, if you can learn to feel it beneath the noise of your resistance to it, is something quieter and more stable than either fullness or emptiness. It is presence itself. It is simple awareness. It is the capacity to observe your own mind without being completely identified with it. It is not as exciting as the stimulation you lost. It is not as comforting as the belonging you left behind. But it is real in a way that those things were not. And this is the secret that the great philosophers and scientists and genuinely alive people have always known. That real pleasure is not the same as the intense stimulation that the consensus dream provides. That genuine joy is not the same as the false happiness that comes from succeeding in the game everyone is playing. That authentic connection is not the same as the comfortable pretense of being understood by people who are pretending alongside you. That actual freedom is not the same as the freedom to move within the boundaries of what everyone has agreed is possible. The intense emotions you lost were created by contrast, by scarcity, by the constant small dramas that keep the human nervous system activated. When you step out of that system, when you step out of the game that creates those emotions naturally fall away. And in their place, if you can learn to live long enough in this strange empty space, something different begins to emerge. It is quieter. It is steadier. It is less dependent on external circumstances constantly aligning in your favor. It is, in fact, more real.